Have you ever noticed how society still finds it strange when a woman doesn't revolve around a man? All it takes is for her to say she's happy on her own, and suddenly there are looks of pity or even threat. It's almost as if her independence were a silent affront to an entire system. Carl Jung once said that individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, demands breaking away from the expectations that shape our persona. And for many women, that means no longer seeking male validation as the fuel for their existence. Here's an uncomfortable truth. When a woman no longer needs a man, she doesn't become cold or unapproachable. She becomes free. Free to love by choice, not by need. Free to say no without guilt and yes without fear. Free to be the center, not a satellite. And that freedom is unsettling because it exposes how deeply we've been taught to confuse love with dependence. Today, you'll understand exactly what changes, inside and out, when a woman chooses to be whole before becoming half of someone else. And if you stay until the end, you'll see that this isn't just a video about women. It's about anyone who refuses to sell their soul in exchange for company. The crossing of the inner bridge. Crossing the inner bridge isn't about moving to a new city, changing careers, or cutting your hair in a symbolic attempt to start over. It's quieter, more intimate, and sometimes far more uncomfortable. Picture yourself standing before a bridge connecting two lands. On one side, the ego with all its certainties, masks, and habits. On the other, the self, that core Jung described as the totality of the soul. To cross this bridge is to let go of the comfort of the familiar and step into the uncertain terrain of shadow work, where each step illuminates dormant archetypes. This is where spirituality stops being theory and becomes a living practice. It's not a sightseeing tour, it's a rite of passage. And interestingly, no one has ever crossed it without facing internal storms. You don't reach the other side simply by walking. You arrive transformed by the journey. As you cross, the persona starts to feel tight and ill-fitting, like clothing 2 sizes too small. What once fit perfectly into your social life no longer works. Many turn back at this point because the ego screams to keep the status quo. But this is where the real learning begins. Crossing the bridge means letting each step dismantle a piece of your armor. For example, when you find yourself reacting with irritation to something you once accepted, it's not weakness. It's a sign that the old version of you no longer fits. It's like upgrading your computer's operating system. Until you adjust, there's slowness, glitches, and uncertainty. But once the new system starts running, you wonder how you lived so long in the old mode. Here, the software is your consciousness. Some people try to rush across the bridge as if they could skip straight to the final version of themselves. But those who understand the process know that a slow pace is essential. It's like savoring a rare wine. Drink too fast, and you lose the taste and aroma that make it unique. In this journey, small practices help keep you grounded. Journaling isn't just recording your day, it's mapping your own evolution. Meditation isn't about emptying the mind, it's learning to observe without judgment. Choosing to read books like Man and His Symbols by Jung isn't entertainment, it's adding light to your path. The bridge is long and each step demands presence. And perhaps what comes after the crossing is even more challenging because when the journey ends, something inside you begins to crumble. The crumbling of the character. When the crossing of the inner bridge comes to an end, the first thing that happens feels, at first glance, like a tragedy. The character you've built begins to crumble. This persona, once so useful for earning approval, maintaining relationships, and surviving in social environments, now feels fragile, artificial, almost absurd. It's like watching a theater set being dismantled. False walls fall, perfect lighting disappears, and suddenly you realize you've been acting in something that wasn't real life at all. Jung said the persona is necessary, But it must never become the whole truth of who we are. And when it breaks, the ego panics, scrambling to glue the pieces back together. But it's useless. Once you see the play for what it is, there's no way to unsee it. This collapse doesn't happen in a dramatic explosion, but through small cracks appearing in the most unexpected places. An old friendship suddenly loses meaning. A habit that once brought you pleasure starts to feel hollow. The job that upheld your status now sounds like a prison. It's in this moment that shadow work stops being an interesting theory and becomes something you live in your own skin. You begin to notice how many choices you made to meet other people's expectations, how many times you swallowed your truth to keep the appearance of harmony. It's painful, but it's also liberating, like discovering the house you've lived in for years had its windows painted over, and when you scrape the paint away, light floods in for the first time. And here lies a quiet danger, trying to replace the old character with a new one, just more sophisticated. It's like swapping one mask for another, believing this one will be final. But the process isn't about creating a better performance. It's about having the courage to exist without performance at all. This is why practices like therapeutic writing, deep conversations with trusted people, and reading works that challenge the ego, such as Memories, Dreams, Reflections by Jung, help maintain authenticity. This stage is like standing naked in front of the mirror and for the first time allowing yourself to look without filters. It's uncomfortable, but it's where you begin to reintegrate parts of yourself that have been locked away. And among those parts, there's one that has always been kept in the shadows until now. The reintegration of the feminine shadow. Reintegrating the feminine shadow is an act of rebellion against centuries of conditioning. It means looking at everything that culture, family, and even your own mind taught you to hide: anger, desire, intuition, power, and saying, "You are part of me too." Jung described the shadow as the psychic storage room of everything we reject in ourselves. And for women, this often includes traits that, if they were masculine, would be celebrated. When a woman begins this shadow work, she discovers that the sweetness everyone praised was often accompanied by an imposed silence, that patience was sometimes self-erasure, and that compassion had been used as a tool for her exploitation. It's a reunion with a strength that was taught to disguise itself as fragility. This process isn't only psychological, it's physical. The body stores memories the mind tries to erase. A woman who was always taught not to cause trouble may realize her shoulders are constantly tense, as if carrying the weight of not disturbing anyone. When she allows the feminine shadow to speak, the body responds. Deeper breaths, a straighter posture, a steadier gaze. Suddenly, actions once unthinkable become natural. Saying no without justification, turning down an invitation without guilt, defending a boundary without fearing the label of difficult. Each of these gestures is like reclaiming stolen territory. And the curious thing is that when she owns these parts, the world sees her differently. But more importantly, she sees herself differently. Reintegration doesn't mean becoming aggressive or hostile. It means learning to wield strength consciously. It's like having a sword sheathed. You don't need to brandish it all the time, but knowing it's there changes the way you walk through the world. Practical exercises help keep this connection alive, liberating dances like intuitive movement, studying feminine archetypes such as Persephone, Lilith, and Artemis, and reading works that expand awareness, such as Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. In reintegrating the feminine shadow, a woman discovers that her first home isn't anyone's approval. It's her own body. And when that happens, her relationship with that body is no longer merely biological. It becomes sacred. The body as the first home. Before any address, before any relationship or career, there is one home that never changes: the body. It's in the body that your whole story is written, and Jung said it holds part of the symbolic language of the unconscious. When a woman recognizes her body as her first home, she stops treating it merely as a vehicle and begins to see it as a temple. This changes the way she eats, dresses, rests. It's not about beauty standards, but about embodied spirituality. It's asking, how can I inhabit this body more fully? Often the answer begins with simple gestures, drinking water with presence, truly tasting food, walking barefoot to remember there's ground beneath you, small practices that transform your relationship with your own center. The body carries signs the ego often ignores. Tension in the jaw may be an unspoken truth, back pain, an old emotional weight, constant fatigue, a warning that the persona is living beyond its limits. This is why reconnecting with the body is also part of shadow work. Instead of numbing symptoms, a woman begins to investigate them, asking what they're trying to say. In this listening, she discovers there is no healing without presence. For example, conscious breathing exercises can help calm an overloaded nervous system. Yoga and Pilates aren't just to stay in shape, but to realign energy. Each movement stops being mechanical and becomes a silent dialogue with the self. Recognizing the body as the first home also means protecting it. That involves choosing relationships that don't drain energy, environments that don't suffocate, and even clothing that allows freedom of movement and breath. It's like caring for a house you love, cleaning, organizing, decorating. Except here, the furniture is habits, and the paint on the walls is daily self-care. When a woman understands this, she realizes that internal silence isn't emptiness, it's sacred space. And that silence is often what society calls loneliness. But perhaps what comes next is the realization that this so-called loneliness is one of the greatest luxuries she can give herself. The silence that is not loneliness. The modern world fears silence. It's been painted as strange, uncomfortable, almost suspicious. But for anyone diving into the individuation process Jung described, silence stops being the absence of sound and becomes the presence of self. In it, the ego loses strength, the persona goes quiet, and the self finds room to speak. True spirituality rarely emerges amid constant noise. It reveals itself in the pauses. And interestingly, these pauses are not lonely. It's like sitting in an empty room and suddenly realizing you're not alone. There's a part of you that has always been there, waiting to be heard. This is the difference between loneliness and solitude. One is lack, the other is source. Many women spend years avoiding silence because they fear the uncomfortable questions that live there. Are you living the life you want, or just playing a role? What are you truly feeling? These questions don't arise in shallow conversations or on social media. They emerge in stillness. That's why intentionally creating moments of silence is an act of shadow work. Walking alone without music, meditating for a few minutes in the morning, journaling before bed, all of these create space for inner archetypes to surface. And when they do, it's not to condemn, but to guide. It's as if your own psyche says, I know what you need, but you have to stop so I can tell you. The most intriguing thing is that the more comfortable a woman becomes in silence, the less dependent she is on external noise to validate her existence. Superficial relationships lose their appeal, the need to prove anything diminishes, and even time seems to slow down. In this space, spirituality stops being talk and becomes a state of being. And this state doesn't isolate her. On the contrary, it strengthens genuine connections. Because when she is whole, she realizes she doesn't need to orbit around anyone to have worth. And that opens the way to one of the most revolutionary lessons: living as the axis, not the satellite. The woman as axis, not satellite. For a long time, women were taught that their value came from revolving around something or someone, a man, a family, a cause, even an image of perfection that never truly existed. This is the logic of the satellite. Reflected light, a predefined path, dependence on an external center. But when a woman understands the individuation process Jung spoke of, she sees that she can be the axis. The axis doesn't orbit anything. It is the point of reference. In this context, spirituality isn't an escape, but a return to center. And this return requires undoing invisible pacts with the ego and persona, which have long convinced her that her worth depended on serving someone else's orbit. Living as the axis means making decisions without needing to justify them to the whole world. It's choosing partners, jobs, and friendships, not out of fear of being alone, but out of alignment with the self. It's like trading a dance, where you follow someone else's steps for your own choreography. Of course, this scares people. Those used to your docility may accuse you of being selfish, cold, or difficult. But this is where shadow work becomes crucial, because living as the axis also means confronting your own shadows, the fear of rejection, the guilt of prioritizing yourself, the inherited archetypes that claim a woman who orbits no one is breaking the natural order. The fascinating thing is that when a woman becomes the axis, she doesn't isolate herself. On the contrary, her relationships become healthier because they don't come from lack. She becomes like a tree with deep roots, offering shade and fruit, not out of obligation, but from abundance. This wholeness creates a new way of loving and being loved. But it also comes with a warning. Pride can slip in quietly, disguised as absolute independence. And if left unchecked, it can turn a solid axis into an isolated tower. That's when the journey demands even greater awareness. The danger of pride in disguise. After a woman discovers her strength and positions herself as the axis, a subtle trap appears. Pride disguised as independence. It's that quiet feeling of "I don't need anyone" that at first feels like freedom, but over time turns into emotional isolation. Jung warned that when the ego takes charge of growth, it builds new prisons, more sophisticated, but prisons nonetheless. At this stage, the persona may swap the mask of submission for the mask of self-sufficiency. And without awareness, this new image can be just as limiting as the old one. Spirituality here demands the humility to realize that there is no true evolution without exchange, without relationship, without human mirrors. This disguised pride often shows itself in the details, refusing help even when it's needed, never admitting vulnerability so as not to ruin the strong image, cutting ties at the slightest sign of conflict. It's the opposite of shadow work, which invites you to look straight at your fragilities. A practical example. A woman who has learned to say no may, without realizing it, start saying no to everything as a way of guarding a newly reclaimed territory. But there's a difference between protecting yourself and shutting down. In this case, the ego acts like an overzealous guard, keeping out not only what threatens, but also what nourishes. True independence isn't about building walls, but about having selective doors. Avoiding this trap requires conscious exercises in connection, joining groups where you can be a listener rather than a leader, accepting care without feeling indebted, allowing others to inspire you too. A recommended read here is Brené Brown's The Gifts of Imperfection, which explores the value of vulnerability. When a woman understands that being the axis doesn't mean being an impenetrable fortress, she opens space for relationships where two whole people meet, not to complete each other, but to walk side by side. And it's exactly this mature, lack-free, pride-free union that prepares the ground for the next step in the journey. The union of two wholes. True partnership doesn't happen when two halves find each other, but when two wholes choose to walk together. Jung pointed out that healthy relationships are living laboratories for psychological growth, where spirituality is expressed not in fusion, but in conscious encounter. Here, there's no search for someone to complete you, only the deliberate choice to share the path. A woman who has crossed her bridge, dismantled her persona, reintegrated her shadow, and claimed her body as her home, no longer accepts losing herself in another. And a man who has done his own work, faced his ego, and engaged in shadow work, doesn't try to trap her. In this setting, love is not possession, it's inspiration. In this union, conflicts aren't signs of failure, but opportunities to deepen the relationship. When two wholes argue, they're not defending insecurities, but adjusting agreements. Communication becomes more honest because there's no fear of losing the foundation of one's identity. Each person already has their own axis, which gives the bond stability. For example, a financial decision isn't imposed, but discussed. A need for personal space isn't taken as rejection, but as care for the self. This kind of relationship breaks the toxic pattern of power games and restores the essence of what it means to be with someone by choice, not necessity. The beauty of this union is that it amplifies what each already is. There's no competition of light, only addition. It's like two rivers that meet and run parallel, respecting each other's banks while nourishing the same sea. Conscious practices help cultivate this kind of relationship. Regular talks about expectations, shared moments of silence, projects that strengthen both as individuals. And when lived this way, the relationship is not the final destination. It's a new bridge. Because even after all this journey, life always offers another crossing. And those who live in this state know that each new bridge is another chance to reinvent themselves. Closing. Now that you've walked with me through this journey, tell me, how many times have you made yourself smaller to fit into someone else's life? How many times have you sold pieces of yourself for attention, approval, or a love that only existed if you adapted? Maybe today it's clearer that true value isn't in being chosen, but in choosing yourself first. If any part of this video struck a chord, don't ignore it. That's your consciousness calling you to the next step. Because this isn't a story that ends here. It's a process. And in the next video, we'll go even deeper into this liberation. We'll talk about what happens when you not only stop needing someone, but learn to attract people who walk at the same pace as you, without pulling or pushing. So subscribe to the channel now, turn on notifications, and secure your place on this path. Think of it like that series you love and never miss an episode of. Each video here is a chapter in a transformation that, if you allow it, will completely change how you see yourself and how the world sees you. See you in the next one.